When I was in middle school, it was just my mom and I living in our home in Florida. In the area that we lived in, we only ever got two types of weather, hot and humid, or cloudy and stormy. I loved it though. The sound of the rain hitting the windows and the thunder cracking through the sky helped me focus and relax. There's always a month or two out of the year where it was typically raining more often than not. One afternoon in May of that year, I was working on some homework in my bedroom. I had my desk positioned right next to the window so that I could look outside whenever I needed to take a minute from my work. It was raining particularly hard, and that put me in the zone, so I was just running through my homework like it was nothing. That was until I was thrown off by something that I thought I had seen out of the corner of my eye. Looking out of my window, from my peripheral vision, I could have sworn that I saw someone walking around. This was really strange for a few reasons. 1, it was pouring rain. 2, it was about 8:30 p.m. And the last reason was that my window didn't face the street. It faced my backyard, which was fenced in. I quickly stood from my seat and pressed my head against my window to get a better look at the dark yard. But it was hard to make anything out perfectly. From what I could tell, there was no one there, but I still couldn't help but feel a bit on edge. I did my best to sit back down and get the rest of my assignments done, and eventually, it was time to get ready to go to bed. I opened my door and called out to my mom to say goodnight, but she had already been asleep in her room, so there was no response. I turned in, and thanks to the sound of rain and thunder, I managed to fall asleep in no time. I was asleep for a couple of hours before a loud noise particularly sent me flying out of my bed. I jumped up and began looking around frantically before catching my bearings. That was when I thought to myself that it was probably just some thunder that woke me up. It was still pouring after all. I could hear the sound of the rain hitting the ceiling above me vividly. I looked over to my alarm clock and saw that it was almost 2 in the morning. I smiled at the thought that I still had a few hours before I had to wake up for school. I rolled over and began allowing the sound of the rain hitting the roof above my head put me back to sleep. I was just about to drift off when my eyes sprang open at an odd thought. I should not have been able to hear the rain hitting my ceiling that loud. There was an attic between my ceiling and the roof, so while sometimes I could faintly hear the rain hitting the roof, it wasn't that loud, and I mainly relied on the sound of it hitting my window to put me to sleep. The first thing that my mind went to was that we had a leak, so I got out of my bed and began getting myself ready to go upstairs to the attic and take a look. But as I left my bedroom, I noticed right away that there was a large trail of water going all through the hallway and eventually up the stairs. I was confused because that would have been a really bad leak for it to have reached that far already. So I called out to my mom to wake her up, which was when I heard her scream. Her bedroom door flew open, and I expected to see her run out of it, but instead, I saw a tall, hooded figure run out of her room and down the hallway toward the front door. I could still hear my mom screaming, so I ran down the hallway toward her room where I found her, cowering in the corner. I helped her up, and we both ran out of the house and made sure we grabbed her phone and car keys. As soon as we were in the car, we called 911 and pulled the car across the street to my neighbor's driveway. The police arrived shortly after we called them, and when I explained about the trail of water and dripping I heard in the attic, one of the officers thought it would be a good idea to check it out. I'm thankful they did because in the attic was another person, a grown man who was soaking wet and dripping water all over the floor, which was what I was hearing in my bedroom. After searching his pockets, the officers found a few of my mom's rings that she had in a box in the attic, as well as some silverware that wasn't even real silver. The officers were happy to apprehend the one suspect, but the other one, who had run out of the house, was nowhere to be found. All we know is that they must have used the sound of the thunder to break in because the front door was damaged as though someone had forced it open. Typically, when I go on sailing trips, I would have either my older brother or my best friend Stefan with me, but this time I decided to go on a solo sailing trip on a route from the coast of northern Mexico over to the Hawaiian Islands and then back. It was something that I had been really looking forward to, especially since I have a cousin in Hawaii with whom I had been expecting to spend a couple of days. The day that I was starting my trip, I double-checked that I had everything that I would need, and by early afternoon, I was out on the water. This was expected to be a 3 to 4 week journey depending on the winds, but I thought it was all going to go well. I never would have seen the storm coming, especially since I checked my weather radar, and at least that morning, it was projected to be clear skies throughout the first portion of my journey. However, toward the end of my first night sailing, right before I was about to turn in for a couple of hours, I spotted a bit of lightning on the horizon, and I was heading right for it. I checked my charter map and figured I could plan a route around the edge of the storm. That way, I could get an hour or two of sleep here and there throughout the night. It only took about 10 minutes before the storm was on us, and I could feel the waves crashing against the side of the boat. The thunder boomed overhead as I rocked back and forth with my eyes closed in my cabin. The plan was to sleep for an hour before the storm got really bad, and then assess the situation once I awake. That was the dumbest mistake anyone at sea could ever make. I assumed I was prepared, when in reality, I was way out of my element, and it almost cost my life. I was only asleep for a short while before I heard the loud crashing sound of a wave coming over the bow of my ship. The weight of the water shook the entire boat, and I was nearly thrown out of my small cot before I even opened my eyes all the way. I heard the most horrifying sound of my life. Through the rain and thunder, I could hear the sound of water rushing into the cabin of my sailboat. Something had caused us to start taking on water, and my boat was actively sinking. I reacted as quickly as I could and grabbed the emergency kit, which included the life raft. And with that in my hand, I put out a mayday signal from my ship, grabbed my satellite phone, and stepped out of the cabin. I ripped the cord of the emergency kit, which inflated the raft in a matter of seconds, and I loaded myself onto it as I watched my sailboat slowly get pulled down in the dark abyss. The storm still raged over me, and the only time I could see anything was through the flicker of the lightning. The waves tossed the raft around, and I did my best to maintain my composure, but it wasn't long before I realized one of the flotation rings on the outside of the raft was faulty and was slowly losing air. With it slowly deflating, the raft only held up for another hour under the weight of the water coming in from the waves and the rain, and it wasn't long before I was drifting along in the middle of a storm with just my life jacket. I know that I would have been dead had it not been for sheer luck. The course that I had been on was apparently a popular fishing area, and to my surprise, there was a local fishing vessel that was making its way toward Mexico as I sent out my distress signal. I don't know how they managed to see the orange life vest floating through the waves and rain, but I was eventually pulled out of the water by a group of sailors who were happy to see me safe. They thought that anyone who had been on board my boat had surely perished in the storm. Lucky for me, it was only my boat that lost its life. There are these really nice campgrounds in Northern Carolina that my family likes to rent a cabin at every year. One year, though, was particularly boring considering how much it rained. We didn't really get to spend a lot of time outside, and as a matter of fact, the only really exciting thing to happen on that vacation was also one of the scariest moments of my life. It was on our last night there, and we had managed to enjoy a couple of hours on the lake before it began to storm again. But this time, the storm was ruthless. The thunder felt as though it was literally shaking the cabin off its foundation. As soon as the storm started, my family and I ran into the cabin and began to hunker down for the rest of the night. Since there wasn't a TV in the cabin, after it got dark, my brother and sister just went to bed. I stayed up with my mom and dad. They were telling stories about when they used to come camping there when they were younger. As we were looking out the window that sat near the table in the cabin's living room, my dad saw something that made him stand up. He calmly told me to go and check on my siblings before telling my mom to make sure the door was locked. As I stood from my seat, I saw what he was seeing. For some reason, standing in the middle of the campground was a single person, and he looked as if he was staring right into the window at me and my family. I ran into the bedroom and was happy to see my brother and sister still asleep, but I'll never forget the feeling of the chills rolling up my spine as I heard the dreaded knock at the door. My dad was polite at first and asked how he could help whoever it was, but that was when the person made a strange request. I remember what he said as clear as day. Through the door I heard, "I saw you and your family earlier, and you guys seem like really nice people. I was hoping you might let me in out of this rain. I'm really sorry to bother you like this. It's just so cold." My dad didn't need any time to think about a response. He kindly let the man know that he had children inside and would rather not let a stranger in right now. It was nothing against him personally, but something seemed shady about the whole situation. That was when things got really tense. There was a brief moment of silence before I heard what I thought at first was thunder, but turned out to be the man banging aggressively on the door. He began yelling for us to let him inside. My father once again asked the man to leave, but this time threatened to call the police. After that, we heard the sound of him walking off the small front porch of the cabin. My mom and dad waited to see if the man had actually left, and after a minute my dad thought it would be safe to look out of the window. But as soon as he made himself visible, he could see the man, who was now standing at the edge of the campsite. The man threw a large stone that came crashing through the window and almost hit my father in the head. My dad covered his face from the glass, and by the time any of us could look out of the window again, the man was gone. He must have run into the woods. My brother and sister were wide awake and crying at this point. My parents did their best to calm them down as we waited for the police to arrive. After taking our statement, they escorted us to our car. We decided to end the trip a few hours early and drove home at around 2 in the morning.